right, welcome everybody to the Rico 12 Ask It Basket. I've got Robert Pardon and Whitney B here with me, and I'm just grateful to be able to sit around and have this conversation that we do once a month with Rico 12. And what we do in this Ask It Basket is Whitney and Robert will go out to treatment centers and take questions from people. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to record answers to a whole lot of questions that come in through those areas. Also, if you out there in the listening audience have questions you'd like to ask us, send an email to rico12pod@gmail.com, and we will get those questions worked into this rotation. But I love doing this. So let's start out and just have each of you introduce yourself real quick. Robert, why don't you take a minute and say hi and introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Robert. I am a recovered alcoholic. That's how I like to introduce myself. When I first met my sponsor 39 years ago, he introduced himself as a happy, grateful, recovered alcoholic. And at the time, I thought it was arrogance until I learned about the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So now I'm very comfortable saying, I'm Robert, I'm a recovered alcoholic. Not that I've ever gotten over the phenomenon of craving, but what I've recovered from is a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body that keeps me in bondage that never allowed me to be free. So I'm pretty excited to be here. I love Whitney. Justin, we got to meet you a few weeks ago, and that was quite an honor. So
Yes.
we're one big happy family.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about that before we get into the questions. But let's have Whitney introduce herself for just a second.
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Whitney B. I am down here in Orem, Utah, working in recovery. I've got about just over a year now in my recovery and sobriety. Just super happy to be part of this community and super happy to be on this podcast today, reaching out to the sick and struggling or the newcomer. So thanks for having me, Justin.
Yeah, thank you, Whitney. Yeah, as Robert said, just a few weeks ago, I was down in Utah at a conference, and it just happened to coincide with Robert speaking on his 39th birthday of sobriety from alcohol. And what a beautiful occasion that was. And I got to meet Whitney at that meeting that she chairs. And man, I just was blown away by the unity, the love, and the size of that meeting. It was so fun to be just a little part of that and to give both of you guys a hug. And I'm just
Yeah,
grateful to be able to have done that.
Thank you. It was good meeting you as well.
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right. So, as I mentioned, we're going to get into some questions here that have been brought up here recently. And I'm going to start off with kind of a phrase, a statement, and then we'll jump into some questions based off of that. Robert, you sent me this statement. It says psychologists have agreed that we cannot become that which we do not see ourselves. And seeing ourselves different is foundational to becoming different. Why don't you start us off and just kind of expound a little bit on that and what that means, and then we'll jump into what that means in recovery and some questions based on that.
Wow, that's a great jumping off place. And I think I was so fortunate. Talked to a friend of mine from Seattle today. He's down in Las Vegas and reminded me of my roots where I got sober at originally. And and it was so important that my mentors and my sponsors convinced me that I was sick, that I had to see myself as sick, not as being bad. Now, granted, I did many bad things, but until I was able to see myself as a very sick person, was I was not able to get well because we just need to see ourselves differently. Now, it took me a while to not be sick, but and if you ask some people, I'm still very sick, and we won't talk about them today. And but I had to flip the script, Whitney and Justin. I had to see myself as a person who did bad things, but as a very sick person, and that allowed me to begin viewing the steps differently. Instead of being a bad person trying to apply good principles, I was a sick person, like if 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 I'm in the hospital and they say take this and you'll get better, I take that and I get better, and that's what I was able to do when I saw myself as sick, not as being bad.
Yeah, so I mean that's really powerful, a very powerful concept. And a lot of people that I talk to, Whitney, this question's for you, but a lot of people I talk to who are hesitant or resistant to the 12-step program and the rooms of recovery and 12-step say, I just don't think it's healthy to identify as an alcoholic, as an addict. Um, but how do we differentiate this idea of I'm not a bad person, I'm a sick person, while I say, hey, I'm Justin, I'm an addict. What Talk to me about your experience with that.
I was one of those people. I found the rooms years ago, and I saw these people standing up and claiming to be alcoholics, and I knew I lived a life very similar to them, but I could not see myself getting up in front of people and saying, I'm an alcoholic, here I am. That was something I hadn't identified as with, and I hadn't, I hadn't believed it yet, but now when I stand up and, when I first stood up in the rooms, I claimed to be an addict, right? That was my thing because drugs were my thing, not so much the alcohol, but the drugs. And when I started to study this program and learn about this program, and I realized that being an alcoholic is that alcoholism, which includes,
Yeah.
all the drugs, all the behaviors, all of these things fall under this alcoholism. And now I'm happy to stand up and claim to be an alcoholic. It's it's one of the things I'm grateful for today. So yeah.
Yeah, I
Let me just
agree.
add to
Absolutely.
that what Whitney said. Um, Not only, oftentimes I will refer to myself as a treated alcoholic, but that is the main reason, Justin and Whitney, you've heard me share so many times. I always refer to myself as a recovered alcoholic
Hmm.
because I want individuals, newcomers, who we hope to address today, and in treatment centers that Whitney and I go into, we're always focusing on the newcomer, and we want to give them an avenue of hope. So when I introduce myself as a recovered alcoholic, by the way, the only place I introduce myself as an alcoholic is the rooms of AA. I don't go to Walmart and say, "Hey, I'm Robert. I'm an alcoholic," or standing in the line at Macy's or wherever. I don't make that pronouncement. But in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I want to identify as being one of many, not as being an individual out there alone.
No, that's powerful. I think that's really powerful, Robert. Thanks for bringing that into this. And I'm one who sometimes feels like an outsider or a imposter because when I go into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or many of those or maybe Narcotics Anonymous, some of those the substance rooms, I I can't say, hey, you know what, alcohol kills me because I don't know. I've never gotten drunk. I don't know what it's like, but I do know that I suffer the disease of alcoholism in the
Yeah.
behaviors, in the processes that I go through. I know from painful experience that that's the case. And that's one of the reasons I don't want to get drunk because I think I would be that person that would
Yeah.
be off the rails, you know. Any other feedback on that for me, from my perspective on that? Got questions about addiction, recovery, or just life in general? Let's noodle it out together. Grab your big book, a pen, a highlighter, and a notepad, and join Nikki M and me, Justin B, on Rico 12 Noodle It Out with Nikki M. Each episode, we take real life questions, ours, yours, and those from the recovery community, and dig deep into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find real, practical solutions. So, if you're ready to do the work and apply the solution, tune in to Noodle It Out with Nikki M, streaming now on your favorite podcast platform.
No, we don't want to invite. Um, I've never directly committed suicide, though I know I'm suicidal just based on my previous lifestyle. So I don't have to go and attempt at the act. I know what my propensity is to burn my life to the ground. And so I don't have to invite other behavior or substance abuse. I've never done fentanyl. I don't have to do fentanyl to know that I would be instantly addicted to it, just like I was crack or meth.
Yeah, no, this is good. This is good. Thank you for going through that. So let's go back to this, this concept of the psychologist that we need to see ourselves differently to become different. So why is positive self-talk so important, especially early in recovery? And how does this identifying as an alcoholic, how does that coincide, or how does that maybe put a barrier with that?
Whitney, you wanna
Yeah, I'll
take a run
go
at
for
that?
sure.
Go ahead.
Um, Kind of what I heard from that psychiatrist, kind of whatever you opened with. I believe in a lot of like goal setting and a lot of looking into the future and trying to grow. I believe in evolving and always being better than you were yesterday. And so I think, yes, positive self-talk in early recovery is essential, you know. And it's so easy to beat yourself up in those days, you know. It's so easy to it's really hard to have positive self-talk in the early recovery because you're just struggling and coming into yourself. But once I kind of humbled myself, claimed to be an alcoholic, you know, that gave me a lot of peace, I guess. And then I could work from that front and set goals and aspire to be something that I wanted to be, or aspire to learn something from somebody that I know that is out there setting an example, you know. Yeah, I just always believe in um trying to be better in whatever way it is, just trying to be better than you were yesterday. So
Yeah.
does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
I think so. Robert, what's your take?
Two things. Number one, Whitney and I were having a little exchange earlier today, and we were talking about how she is now responsible for the questions, right? So we were having that discussion between us before we had it with you. And years ago, from Stephen Covey, who's the master from Principle Centered Leadership back in 1993, which I know ages me. I was an older man even then. Um, and I was telling Whitney that responsible means response able. Today, we used to be reactors. We reacted to everything. Today, we are able to respond. So we see ourselves differently. Also, when I first came upon that, and when before I ever heard that quote by that psychologist, early on in my recovery, about 2.5 years, I met a young lady who was stunning. She was so beautiful, but she was anorexic, and she was 5'8", 118 pounds, and just stunning. And yet she saw herself as fat. She saw herself that she couldn't eat. She was starving herself because in her mind she was some overweight person who was unattractive. And I looked at her, I said, something's wrong somewhere. And I think, and I think, just to jump to it, that's where it's so important for us to go to meetings, to be around positive people who see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train. You know that we need to see our glass as half full, not half empty. And if we get in the water, we know we can rise with everyone else.
Oh, this is powerful ways to set my mindset and to strive to. I love that concept of I need to respond rather than react, because yeah.
Justin, let me just interject here. I'm so excited about this question, this road we're going down. This is not related to alcoholics. This is not related to sex addicts. This is not related to drug addicts. This is not related to gambling. This is related to all humanity. And this is a universal principle that we can all adopt, um, from normal to abnormal, to sick to perfectly well, to people who were raised in a very nice. I mean, if you met Whitney's parents, mom and dad, I had the honor to do that. You think, how'd she get screwed up along the way? Because her mom and dad are so nice. It doesn't really matter where we come from. Sometimes the idea gets in our mind that we're just not good enough, and we need to see ourselves differently.
Yeah. No, that's so good. Whitney, how does that look in your life to see yourself differently when that liar, the voice in your head says,
Mhm.
no, you're still a piece of garbage. How do
Yeah.
you move through that?
I have that what you're talking about in the back of my head, and I think a lot of people do, most people do. But mine seemed extra harsh in my early recovery. You finally stop numbing yourself, and everything comes flooding in as a wave, and you remember all the things you did. You have all this guilt and shame, and just all these emotions and all this talk in your head that just tells you you're bad. You didn't just do some bad things; you're actually bad. Um, how I work through that now, and a lot of it is just transforming my life through the steps, that spiritual awakening that it speaks of. Um, I had, and I had it. Wasn't overnight. It wasn't like one beam of light moment, but over the course of time, I had so many different little spiritual experiences, and then it was like I woke up one day and I'm like, oh my God, I get it, and and my life eased up, and so that thing in the back of my head wasn't as harsh. I could start living a life that actually produced like healthy thoughts about myself, and how I continue to do that now is I actually, you know there's something called mirror work. You stand in front of the mirror and you um what's that word? Give yourself
Oh, affirmations?
thank you. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
affirmations. And I thought that was so cheesy when I was prescribed to do that in my therapy, but I started to do it and I saw the change happen, and I saw it over a course of time. Like I could look at myself in the mirror and have better thoughts about myself. Those little things, those little tricks do work. And so I encourage that for people. And any trick you have like that, I mean, waking up in the morning and praying is one of them for me too. Just having that start the day with like healthy, productive thoughts about yourself and life, and things just aren't as, you don't hear that voice as much, over the course of
Yeah.
time. So yeah.
Yeah.
True.
Robert, I've heard you say that one of your waking up moments, rock bottom, was when you looked yourself in the mirror and were like, I can't even look at myself. Who is that person?
Mhm.
Talk to me about this mirror, this concept of being able to look yourself in the mirror at your advanced experience of 39 years sobriety.
Oh, you're talking directly to my ego. I I I look at myself in the mirror every day, and Whitney, you brought up just a great thing with affirmation, Justin. Thank you. That mirror work, because I literally do. I look at myself because I had when I stood in front of the mirror on February 9th of 1986, I saw myself as dead, and there was nothing I could do about it. And I went into treatment that day. Today, I look in the mirror and think, dude, you've got it freaking going on. What are you going to do today? What are you going to use your hair looking right? Dress this, dress that, because you're going to go out and you're going to conquer something. You just don't know what it is yet. And and I know with my higher power, I can accomplish anything. I'm not the same person who was going to die. I'm the same person that I'm either going to die of old age, or I'm going to get hit by a bus. One or the other, but I'm going to go out of this world sober, happy, joyous, and free. And that's how I see myself every single day. To not see myself every single day is to ignore the miracle that has occurred between you, Whitney, and me, and others that we know. And I will never deny the miracle again.
That's such a beautiful thing to say. I want to go back to um, that voice in our head that can be so loud and so denigrating, just an evil voice. For somebody that's early in recovery, like you said, Whitney, early in my recovery, that voice was super loud. And maybe the question is here. I only act out to add some normalcy to my life, and I'm gonna add something here to add some quiet to my brain. Why
Yeah.
is that wrong? What are your thoughts on that, Robert? And then we'll go to Whitney on that.
You know what? I drank and used because I would do what is called, I would quiet the madness. But I needed a sedative just to quiet all the voices that would go on of failure, of self-deprecation, of all those things that would people would tell me, Robert's a wonderful person. If he didn't do this, if he didn't do that, there was always attached to a behavior. And then I would look at myself and say, yeah, you are a POS. You are bad. You are, who walks out on their kids? Who does this? Who does that? Today, I just look at my life and say, you know what? I'm a person with faults, but hey, I'm at the top of my game and I'm going to run this thing out. And today, I look at the examples that are set before me from others. I tell Whitney all the time, she is the future of recovery. She is the future because I'm going to be gone. I mean, this is natural. I'm going to be gone and she's going to be carrying on the message. You're going to be carrying on the message. And the best I could do for you is to go out on a positive note because it's going to affect you in your approach to living. And it's why I say I'm a recovered alcoholic, because my sponsor said he is a happy, grateful, recovered alcoholic. And he showed me how 100 men and women wrote a book to show me how they achieved that.
Hey, Spearheads, if you're looking to dive deeper into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with people who live the solution, then you won't want to miss RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable. Join David G., Nikki M., and me, the moderator Justin B., 3 recovered addicts from multiple fellowships, as we break down the big book line by line. In each 30-minute episode, we share our experience, strength, and hope in a real, raw, and practical roundtable discussion. So, if you are ready to learn and apply what you learn, tune in to RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable on your favorite podcast platform. Yeah, thank you for that, Robert. How about you, Whitney? What do you say to this question of, I only act out to add some normalcy to my life, some quiet to my brain? Why is that wrong?
That's how it all began for me. All growing up, I knew there was something that wasn't right about me. I knew something was bothering me or something was missing. I just knew I felt I was different. And when I got into my younger adult years, where these things kind of come up, I branched out and I did, smoke some weed and I started to drink a little, and it shut all that down. I forgot about it, or it was just numbed out or whatever. So I liked that, that's what's so deceiving about our addiction is I loved that quiet down. It was the solution to all that noise. And so of course I dove right into that. And it's a big lie, it's a big lie. And this is what leads us right into our addiction, and it just gets so out of control. But I think initially that's what attracted me to drugs and alcohol is it was the solution to all my pain, my underlying pain that I didn't know how to recognize. I didn't even know what it was, but I knew it was there. It was in my chest and in my heart. So
yeah, thanks for sharing that. Go ahead,
Father
Robert.
Father Martin in his Chalk Talk said, alcohol, drugs, and we can assign any behavioral that would allow us to escape. He said it put to sleep that which made us feel uncomfortable.
Yes.
So any time I was uncomfortable, I acted out. I went to a strip club, or I gambled a paycheck away, or I didn't come home, or I drank, or I used. I did something that would just put to sleep. The problem was still there. I just didn't recognize it as connected to my behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so today the opposite is true. I know that if I'm experiencing a problem, number one, it's probably associated with what I'm doing or not doing, and I fix that. Or I just call it life. It's just life, and life just happens. And if I'm willing to be patient with my higher power, this too shall pass.
I had an awakening here. It's been, I think, about a month and a half ago, about this very question here, putting to sleep anything that makes me uncomfortable. I was doing Duolingo. I was learning some language, on Duolingo, and between each lesson or whatever, there's a quick ad, and there was an ad that came up and this actor in the ad said, "I found the perfect game that makes me forget everything in my life."
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw that ad, I was like, "Oh, man." It was like a kick to my teeth. Like,
Yeah. That's good.
where am I numbing out in places that
Yeah.
I think is not my main problem, is not anything
Yeah.
like that. And it was a real look at myself in the mirror and go, okay, what else is there? Is there something
Mhm.
else I need to address?
Justin, let me jump because you just you just described why the steps are important.
Mhm.
That was beautiful because all I heard you say was the steps, the steps, the steps. So we now we live in steps 10, 11, and 12. My sponsor says if we're willing to take our, you know, personal inventory, if we're willing to take an inventory of our present, it doesn't become the wreckage of our past. So, but we begin to recognize where we were wrong, what we need to do to get it right, who we need to consult to get it right, our higher power, and then we walk through a mind change. But that was a perfect illustration of what the steps, without mentioning the steps, why they're so important and why they're important to do in order because they're all
Mhm.
progressive. I can't do step 12 until I've done step one.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And as you mentioned, living in steps 10, 11, and 12, I am practicing watching all day every day for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment,
Mhm.
fear.
Yeah,
And that's why I was able to recognize that ad was it pinged one of those things. Oh, I'm
yeah.
being selfish with my time,
Yes.
or I'm being dishonest with my time, whatever it is, something
Mhm.
pinged that made me reflect on that. Whitney, what's your experience with striving to watch for those things every day?
Um, it's still something that's heavy in my life. I've worked the steps and I did the 6, 7, and 8 and 9, and I live in 10, 11, and 12, just like Robert said. But by doing that, I'm kind of in full awareness. As soon as I wake up, I try to stay in full awareness of my character defects that I've picked up along the way, that I know I have, that I know I'm going to constantly be working on. It's never probably going to go away, but I can always at least notice them and try to be better with them. So that's something that is presently very, I guess I'm aware of in my life. And um, by kind of analyzing them through the day and catching them here and there and seeing how they are part of my life, at the end of the day, I'm able to kind of sit down and take that inventory and see where I can correct things or be better, or, not do the same thing tomorrow. Because I have a lot of habitual habits, habitual things that I do. And
Mhm.
those are the things that I really want to work on. So,
Yeah, good, good. Robert, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that was perfect.
Okay, excellent. I agree. Okay, so let's go back to a question brought on by one of the newcomers in the treatment center, and I think this is one that I think is pretty. Um, I've never heard the question, but as I read it, I'm like, man, that's so true. Why do I have so many using dreams, and what do they
mhm.
mean? Early on, why am I just fantasizing and dreaming so much about my addiction? Robert, what do you think?
Uh, I think the closer we are to our past, the more our unconscious brings it to a consciousness. I think it's 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 what I've called over the years the replacement theory of recovery. And we don't just stop thinking about drinking, we start drinking about not drinking. And so as just as light pushes out darkness, um, I haven't had a drunk dream in probably 20 years, 25 years. I just don't have them because alcohol is so far removed from me. Drugs are I don't fantasize. I don't live in that world. But when we're I think when we're waiting for the other shoe to drop, that shoe reminds us of our past. And if it and if it's part of our conscious, even subjective consciousness, it's going to be part of our unconscious behavior. It's like Stephen Covey talks about playing whack-a-mole and how we hit one thing down. Problems just don't go away. We can cover them up, but they're going to pop up somewhere else. And again, that goes to good sponsorship. That goes to renewing our thinking. Um, you know, there's a biblical passage that said the renewing of our mind. We need to renew our mind. Um, I don't think about strip clubs. I don't think about gambling anymore. Why? Because I don't do those things. They're not part of my life anymore. And so the further away I get from that behavior or that substance, uh, the less I think about it, the less I think about it in the conscious, it doesn't come up in the subconscious. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I have a thought on that, but I want to hear what Whitney has to say before I jump to my thought.
Okay. Well, here's my experience with this. I as soon as I got sober, I started having using dreams, right? And still to this day, a year sober, I still have them regularly. And my thought on it is I think it's just kind of our minds reminding us that it's
Yeah.
still back in our heads, it's still in there. I used hard drugs and substances for so many years, right? And I think that is kind of imprinted back there. And so
Yeah.
even if that obsession's been removed, like it has been for months now, I don't think about drugs. I don't want to use. I don't get triggered. I still have these using dreams. I mean I had one last week and it's interesting. They're always kind of identical, but it's like a repetitive dream. But um, they used to affect me quite a bit in my early days. You know, I'd wake up and I'd be sweating head to toe and I'd be panicked and I'd be triggered and all these different things. But now I have them and I wake up and I kind of just laugh them off because it's like I'm so used to having them and they're so ineffective. It's just kind of like a flash from my past and I just move on. But they are still very prevalent in my life, I would say.
Now, now I would add, it took me about 2 or 3 years before I was able to remove my thinking, um, when I stopped being afraid. And I think, Whitney brings up something important. So if you're 1 or 2 years down the road and you're still having them, don't worry about it, as long as you're not acting out. Now, if if it becomes part of your consciousness, then you have a problem. But the subconscious is a whole different story. It occurs while we're sleeping, and we have random thoughts. Um, but I also think that what Whitney stated is very healthy because we're only as sick as our secrets. And the more we reveal, the best way to heal is to subject the wound to sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I love both of you are great examples, I think, of the miracle of recovery, of applying the steps in our lives here because um Robert, 39 years down the road, you said it's been 20, 25 years since you think you've had a drunk dream. Whitney, you're a year down the road and now you can kind of chuckle when that
Yeah.
happens. You can go, you know what? Yeah, I had the dream. It's silly. It doesn't dominate my life anymore.
Yeah.
One
Mm-hmm.
thing that I would like to share that my sponsor once shared with me is I was having some of these dreams after about, oh, I don't know, I think I'd been sober about 5 years or so. I was like, what is going on? And and he said, are you doing your nightly review, or when we retire at night, are you constructively reviewing your day? And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm thinking about it. And he's like, you need to check those things off. You may be white knuckling it without even knowing it. You may
Yeah.
be dwelling on some resentment, on some fear, on some anger, whatever it may be that is unchecked. And you're going to bed without God going to bed there
Mm-hmm.
with you,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what's happening. And I've recognized that when I have, drunk dreams, when I have dreams of using in my life, almost every time I can look back and go, what did I not check in? Oh,
Hmm.
Yeah.
there it is,
Hmm.
and that's been really helpful for me. Now, um, is that everybody's experience? I don't know, but I've shared that with many of my sponsees who have said, "Man, I'm really struggling with my dreams." Okay, well, let's really get
I
into
love
your
that.
your
Yeah,
nightly
I love
review.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had a friend that I told her, I said, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. What if there wasn't another shoe? And as soon as I was really able to see myself at about 3 years of never drinking again. I mean, It was off the table. It was no longer something that was a solution for me. I would drive my car off a cliff before I ever drank, because driving my car off a cliff would be less painful and it would be quicker. And so as soon as drinking and acting out was never an option, was when I started to see those subconscious thoughts alleviate.
Yeah, I like that. All right. Any other thoughts on that? I'd like to get into some sponsorship type questions here, but is there anything else on that?
No.
No, I don't think
Okay,
so.
perfect. So, got a couple of questions here that I think have to do with sponsorship. Let's start with, if I'm working the steps and I relapse, do I have to start my steps over? What's your take on that, Robert?
Uh, you know, the short answer is yes, because somewhere along the line, we stopped viewing ourselves as being powerless. We thought that we could drink again successfully. Now, what I do in concert with that is I walk people through the steps backwards. I find out where they were at when they got off the rails, and then I walk backward to step one, and I allow them to see a connection between where they went off 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, where they just couldn't say something, they were sorry, they took back the power that they gave up in step three. They believed that their response was sane, so the only result is to go back to the power, because now I'm uncomfortable, right? So I do two things. I have the person go back and visit step one. What was it about your relapse that made you think that you had power over this addiction or this behavior or this substance? And while I take a look at, maybe they say they were on step 9, but really they hadn't really dug deep. They weren't honest in step 5. So I kind of walked them back. Tell me your experience. And that's what my sponsor did with me when I had relapsed over 71 days. He went back to step 3, said, obviously you didn't turn your will and your life over to the care of God. Let's do the 3rd step prayer. But let's also talk about step 2. Let's also talk about the power that you thought you had over that first drink. So yes, I visit step 1, but I also find out where they were at when they got off the rail. Then I walk them backward to step 1.
So does that look like, hey, I mean, it sounds like to me, let me rephrase that. Robert, it sounds like to me that if and when that happens, you say, okay, let's figure out where it went off the rails. Now let's revisit step 1 and work back to where it went off the rails and make sure that we're on solid ground again. Does that mean, no, we're going to start at step 1. We're going to start reading the book from page, the Roman numerals again together. We're going to do these things together. What does that look like?
I'm not that strict, because at the end of the day, until we see ourselves as powerless, that's why on page 30 it says we had to admit to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. When I admit to you I'm powerless over alcohol, that my life had become unmanageable, I'm speaking that out in a room. But I was taught it's 3:00 in the morning and the lights are out and nobody else is there. What is the truth about you? What is the truth about Robert Pardon? Let's visit that, because that's going to determine, just like I was taught early on, the level of gratitude I have for everything that's going on in my life will determine the quantity and the quality of my sobriety moving forward.
Hey, Rico 12 Spearheads. If our recovery resources have helped you, please consider a donation. Your financial support, as well as your word of mouth support, keeps Rico 12 running and reaching the man who is still sick. Donate today at rico12.com/support or check the show notes for PayPal and Venmo links. Every contribution helps carry the message. Thanks for being a Rico 12 Spearhead. Good, good. Whitney, do you have any additional thoughts on this question?
No, I think Robert answered it perfectly. I just strongly believe that when like Robert's totally right. When you fall off and you need to look at where you went wrong and how you went wrong, but bottom line, you are always powerless and that's why you went back out.
Mhm.
And so I think it's very, very essential to start back on one and do a consistent refresh, you know. So yes, Robert said it perfectly.
Good, good. All right, well let's go a little bit further into this these sponsorship questions. How long do I have to be sober before I can sponsor? What's your experience with that, Whitney?
Well, what I was told is that as long as you've worked your steps and you have more time than the other person, you are able to sponsor them.
I love that simple answer, and I think I that's my experience also. What's your
Yeah.
take on it, Robert?
Exactly that. And I think if you're newer in sobriety, you need to let the person know that you're going to communicate with your sponsor
Mm-hmm.
on anything. So there's a connection. I'm 5 months sober. I might not have all the answers, but I know someone who does.
Yes.
And I make sure that there's a connection between my sponsee, me, and my their grant sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
All of my sponsees have Will's phone number, and they can
Mm-hmm.
call Will anytime. And I
Mm-hmm.
encourage them to do that. I said, this is my answer, but if you want someone with 45 years to answer it, you're going to contact, and many of them do. Um, Matter of fact, I'm moving to Florida, and one of my sponsees, I asked him to be under one of my other sponsees who's been sober 7 years, and this other person's been sober 2 years. I said, look, rather than me be your sponsor because I'm going to be in Florida, why don't I put you underneath so and so? They will help you. You're never losing me, but I want you to be under because I just think emotionally and connectivity wise, they need that proximity to make things seem more real. And by the way, I think that people like Whitney can prove to be more valuable than me, not because her year is more valuable than mine any more than 7 is more valuable than 2 or 12 is more valuable than 10, but people can see Whitney's sobriety. They can't see mine. They can see some old man with 39 years who thinks he knows everything. Where Whitney, a little over a year, 14 months now, something like that, they can look at her and say, I can do that. You, you're probably a liar, but I can do that, which means Whitney is more valuable than me. Why not? Why not? Why not capitalize on that value?
I think that's super powerful, and I love how you talked about creating, maintaining, and developing the relationship. It's almost a family type relationship, a
It is.
multi-general relationship between sponsor, sponsee, grand sponsee, and that down the line. I love
Mm-hmm.
that. Good. Okay, so I think this next question kind of goes along with that. Why is it so important to have service commitments in early recovery? I mean, say I'm just barely getting started, and my sponsor says, "Guess what? You need to make the coffee for the meeting." Why is it so important to have those what may seem like menial tasks but service opportunities? What's your take on that, Whitney?
I totally love the idea of service and service commitments, and I only say that out of my own experience. My sponsor was great and got me right into a chair position, right into so I had a couple chair positions a week that I was supposed to commit to for 6 to a year. And not only did that require me to go to 2 meetings every week on top of whatever else I did, but it put me right in the middle of the community. And I was, without trying, I was introduced or met these people that, I probably wouldn't have if I wasn't going early or if I wasn't, chairing a meeting. And that's why, I have such a big community down here in Orem now. And that's why I'm not moving back up to Salt Lake, because I cherish the people in this community. It's very special down here. And I just feel like that's probably one of the big reasons that they have people jump right into service commitments, but it's just you learn so much from any service commitment. That's just a matter of fact. And so if you can do that early in your recovery, it's definitely going to get you through some time, you know?
Yeah. Now, Robert, let's talk to the old timer on this. Sometimes I go into a meeting and I'll be like, "Oh, they've got this covered. I don't need to get too involved in this meeting, even if it's going to be my home group or I'm going to come back regularly." Why is it important for the old timer to get into service, and what does that look like? Does it look like in the meetings? Does it look like sponsorship? What does old timer service look like, Robert?
It looks just like Whitney's. It looks just like yours. Serving is serving. And we don't decide where we're going to serve. God appoints us and he anoints us to go and serve. Um, you know, early on in my sobriety, I was 6 months sober. I was going to meetings. I was reading my big book. I was had a good sponsor. I was praying. I was doing all the things that a person needs to do to give an appearance of sobriety. Though I knew something was missing. I knew there was a magic drug. There was a panacea. There was something that didn't get that if it didn't get added to my recovery, I was going to relapse. There was no question in my mind. And it scared me even more so than my encounter in the mirror on February 9th of 1986. And I went to my sponsor, Jack, and I said, Jack, what is it? Tell me you know what's wrong with me. Because if I go back, I'm never coming back, Jack. I will die. And he said, Robert, service. He said, the one thing I notice about you is you don't serve. You have a heart to serve. You just don't do it. So that night we went on a 12-step call in Las Vegas and I started making coffee, cleaning ashtrays, and I don't know I did better, but to this day, Whitney and I do podcasts, I do a lot of things. I'm serving the alcoholic because I want to be the example of the first 100. They wrote a book so people like you and me and Whitney can get well, and to carry on that vision is what we're all about.
Yeah, the phrase from the big book that always rings out to me when I get in a place where I'm like, I'm gonna coast, I'm gonna coast for a little bit, is when all other measures failed,
Yes.
work with another alcoholic saved the day.
Yes.
And I've experienced that in my life where I've gotten to the point I was like, okay, I'm just gonna coast. I'm gonna do the bare minimum. I'm just gonna roll through this. And and soon enough, I saw the painting on the wall. I saw I saw a smashed impression of my own face coming up against the wall, going, man, you're gonna run into that wall. What do I need to do? And I need to get into service with that.
Yes.
Any other thoughts? I see you thumbing through the book there, Robert.
Oh, yeah. So I get real excited about this stuff, as you can tell. On Roman numeral 17 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is part of the forward to the second edition, it says, it is also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to bring about permanent recovery. Permanent recovery. So if I do that, why does it surprise anyone that I expect to die sober? I expect to serve until I die. Why can't I have some permanent recovery, permanent sobriety? That's what I'm here for. And if it all it takes me is getting out of me, and because it's very, and I don't care any monotheistic religion, any yoga, any Buddhist philosophy, every religion that has to do with the higher power says to get out of you and go help somebody else. If you want to, and I tell people, I told them at a meeting last night, if I'm willing to be third, I can have everything that a person who's first has. So I'm willing to be third. And third means I'm serving, in step 12, it says we question, we acknowledge our spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We try to carry this message to alcoholics, and then we practice the principles in our affairs. It has nothing to do with me. Everything has to do with the acknowledgement of God and others. What makes me think I'm part of that equation? And yet, when I serve you and Whitney and others, I am served. But I'm served by God. I'm not served by man. Isn't that crazy?
I love that triangular, circular, whatever it is that
Yes,
It's
that just
yes.
comes around and goes around. Awesome. As we start to wrap this up, let's go into some closing statements, I guess. Whitney, what's your final takeaway or final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us as we wrap up this recording?
Um, I guess I've been on a kick of service lately. From my own experience, just getting right into service from the very beginning with service positions, and then after step 12, getting right into service with sponsoring women. That has been the, I don't know, the brightness in my whole recovery. That has been the driving force in my whole recovery. So I just always promote service, and I can't get too much. I hold positions, I sponsor women. I mean, uh, countless women lately. And I get, the more I get, the more joy I get, because the more it fills up my schedule with all these great, spiritual experiences. And yeah, I guess that's my takeaway, is just service, service, service. I love service.
yeah.
So
Good. I love it. Robert, how about you? What's a takeaway and words of wisdom?
You know, I'm so fortunate to be 71 years old with 39 years. And that has come from the fantastic mentorship and sponsorship I've had over the years. And like Whitney and you, it has come from tireless opportunities in treatment centers and working with other alcoholics. I'm having dinner Friday night and going to a meeting. I'm having dinner with 5 of my sponsees as a going away. And you know what? I can't wait to get to Florida so I can see where I get to serve next. I'm
mhm.
already looking at meetings. I'm already saying this. I'll go here. I'll go there. It's the luxury of retirement, and so I think I'm gonna go here and go there. I'm already looking at treatment centers. Where can I serve? Where can I do that? So anticipation of leaving this area, I'm already looking where I can serve, because I know that service, it might not be the key to sobriety, because even Bill said we feel a man on thinking when he says sobriety is enough, but it certainly is the foundational aspect to being happy, joyous, and free. If you're not happy, joyous, and free, you're probably not serving, and I will
Mhm.
die on that hill. And the way to find value in me, which I've always wanted to see, is others seeing value in me. And it sounds paradoxical, but it's true. If I want to see myself better, if I want to see myself well, then go help someone else get well. Even Zig Ziglar in his "See You at the Top" said, "You want to be successful? Go find enough other people and help them be successful." Every biblical, every monotheistic approach in the world says you have to become last and put others first, and you therefore will be first. And I want to be in line. I want to do the same thing over and over again and expect the same result, not doing the same thing over and over again expecting different results. So
Yeah.
that's what I do.
Love it. And as we've been speaking, there's a couple of paragraphs, actually a couple of pages from the big book that come to mind. I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs from my closing out statement here. This is on pages 152 and 153 in the chapter A Vision for You. And I'm going to read this to the newcomer. And I'm going to read this to the old timer. I'm going to read this to anybody who may not be feeling that happy, joyous, and free. Yes, there is a substitute, and it is vastly more than that. It is a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. There you will find release from care, boredom, and worry. Your imagination will be fired. Life will mean something at last. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. Thus we find the fellowship, and so will you. And then I'm going to skip a line here. You're going to meet these new friends in your own community near you. Alcoholics are dying helplessly like people in a sinking ship. If you live in a large place, there are hundreds, high and low, rich and poor. These are future fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Among them, you will make lifelong friends. You will be bound to them with new and wonderful ties, for you will escape disaster together and you will commence shoulder to shoulder your common journey. Then you will know what it means to give of yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. You will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself. I'm so grateful to be commencing shoulder to shoulder with you, Robert, and you, Whitney. We were brought together physically a couple of weeks ago, and this community that is now worldwide, and it's just as easy, maybe not quite as effective, but as easy as to connect with so many people all over the world, virtually and over meetings like Zoom or whatever. Man, it is a beautiful thing to commence shoulder to shoulder with each other. Thank you both for being here today. Any last words before I close it out?
I'm just so full of gratitude for just my recovery and this last year, and the opportunity to work with you guys and reach out to the fellow struggling addict.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much, Whitney. Everybody, keep coming back. Jump into service, jump into action. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it.